I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and this is a Jaguar XE P300 R-Dynamic Black Edition. Now this is obviously quite an important vehicle for Jaguar because it is a competitor in one of the most esteemed premium segments in the world, the premium mid-sized executive sedan, with huge names like the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, BMW 3 Series and Audi A4 dominating this space. But as of maybe a decade ago, including Jaguar, there are a lot of brands vying to compete in this segment again, owing to platform sharing and economies of scale. So has Jaguar's effort, the XE, done a good job? Or rather, I should say, is it still doing a good job in 2021? Because this car launched back in 2015 to the world, and we got it a little bit after that here in Australia. And then in 2019, it got this facelift, which really amps up the sort of sportiness of this car. And of course, in Australia, it's now only available in R-Dynamic guise, but it culled the range from 15 strong to just 2 variants, and both of them are only available with what's under this car's bonnet, the 221 kilowatt turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, that's what we're going to find out in today's review. And of course, if you have any thoughts on this gorgeous Jag XE, you can let me know in the comment section down below. While you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit subscribe. Now, like the exterior, the cabin of this particular Jaguar XE is conservative in its specification. You get black everything, black leather seats, black piano black inlays, and it all feels a little bit dull perhaps, for me at least. And I'll pop over the screen the way I'd specify this car. I'm sure Tom would specify it with a lovely light tan interior, but for me, the dark brown works nicely. And anyway, the rest of the stuff is pretty good. Starting with the actual leather itself, it's quite nice and soft to the touch, though it isn't Jaguar's highest grade Windsor leather that you can option on this car, along with 18-way adjustable seats, and that comes standard if you go for the HSE specification, but we just have the black edition here, which is essentially based on the entry-level SE specification and costs about $64,000 plus options. This car we have here has some options, obviously not in terms of exterior color or interior color, but rather down to the technology package. So we get this 10-inch touchscreen here, the Touch Pro Duo setup, which is great. Really nice sort of muted color palette for Jaguar's own infotainment system. Super easy to swap between their system and your own Apple CarPlay. And that's not something that every vehicle offers. It doesn't give you full widescreen, so it keeps these little bars on the side, which I actually really like because it means you can easily switch between Jaguar mapping or Waze or your own music on Spotify or DAB or whatever you want to do. So it's great. Below that, we've got digital climate control dials. The base car just gets physical dials, but these work so nicely. You've got these little temperature gauges, nice and big actually, easy to hold. And then if you want to adjust your fan speed, you just pull it and you adjust your fan speed. But honestly, the auto program in this car does such a good job, I never really needed to do that. Below that as well, finally for the tech pack, we get wireless charging, which is a neat touch to work with the wireless CarPlay. And then behind that, Jaguar, following the facelift of the XE, went back to a traditional gear stick away from the rotary selector. You can let me know in the comment section down below, because although I like the rotary selector, I appreciate the ease of use that this offers. You've also got very simply laid out controls around it for your drive mode, for your engine start stop, and a little physical volume knob that is best accessible by the passenger. You also get your stop start here, and then nice little center console, 2 cup holders, 12-volt socket here, and then a couple more charging points in here, 12-volt USB-A and a fast charging USB-C, and that's all nicely appointed, as are the door bins, which are just big enough to fit this bottle here, which is a roughly 1 litre in size, so that's pretty decent. What about the steering wheel? It's lovely in Jaguar and matches the seats, as I mentioned before. It's leather appointment, slightly perforated on the inside, quite large in its overall size, which maybe doesn't suit the R-Dynamic slightly sporty feel, but you know, feels good in the hands. And you get these gloss black buttons here, which kind of look like they're going to be haptic touch, but thankfully they're not. You do have to press them. But yeah, everything falls to hand pretty well. The only thing I will point out is that the heated steering wheel that is an option in this car is still a button on this wheel. It's just blanked out, and it's the same story with the full adaptive cruise travel assist system, which kind of feels a bit cheap. Anyway, what doesn't feel cheap is in front of me the digital driver's display, which is better than BMW's, but perhaps not quite as good as Audi's and Mercedes. You get a full map display with navigation. That comes up in the head-up display, which is standard on this black edition as well. And yeah, feels really nice and quite well integrated to the rest of the car. As for other material quality, it's good up on the doors, up on the dash, it's all soft touch as you'd expect, and it doesn't really descend into super scratchy plastic. I still have this leatherette padding to rest my leg on, which is great. And finally, probably the piece of resistance in the Jaguar XE is the Meridian stereo. Now, this isn't the full surround sound system. This is just the basic Meridian 13 speaker stereo that comes standard on this black edition, packs in a subwoofer in the boot, and it sounds great. Natural, warm, and not too digital. And it does a great job of rendering your tunes. So that's kind of what this Jag's all about. A lovely cocoony experience. You feel sat low, comfortable, and relaxed in this vehicle. So let's check out the back seat. Jumping in back here, and the Jag reminds me of sports sedans of old, like my own BMW 3 Series E36, because it's very tight back here. And although you do have provisions for aircon vents, charging, a little shelf here, decently appointed leather seats, flip down armrest with cup holders and soft touch plastics, it's not a very comfortable place to be honest. I look relatively comfortable if I squeeze my head down. I do have a little bit of knee room behind my driving position, a tiny bit of toe room, but if I sit up straight, my head's right against the ceiling. And if this car had the optional sunroof as well, it would cost not only extra money, but also extra headroom that I don't have to spare anyway. And there's a few other things like the big hump in the middle seat here. It's like they didn't even try to make a provision for a third seat, and the transmission tunnel means it's almost unsittable. They also have quite a lot of encroachment on the bolsters back here. So yeah, look, if you're gonna have two people up front and maybe some kids in the back or some shorter people, then the XE might be okay. But if you need to carry 4 or 5 full-size people, then this isn't exactly the car you want to choose. Anyway, that's enough about the back seat. Let's talk about the boot. Now, the rear end of the Jag XE is absolutely my favorite angle. This car, as I mentioned at the front, gets this black pack, so you get P300, Jaguar and XE in black. Not my bag. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. But the real problem comes when we pop this manually operated tailgate and we find it's just like an old school sedan in terms of practicality, and it's also just like an old school sedan in terms of outright boot size, because this car only gets 345 litres of boot space, and that's really small. As you can see, we can't actually fit the 3 chasing car suitcases in, we can only fit the big and the small. At least it's nicely finished. You've got these very soft little extras around the side, but its real issue is its aperture through the middle, and it makes it very difficult to fit a bicycle in the back. If that's something you're going to do a lot, then there are other options, not to mention station wagons sold by other brands, which unfortunately Jaguar doesn't do for the XE, even though we think it would look absolutely fantastic. Couple of good things though, you do get a space saver spare tyre, a couple of luggage hooks, so it's not too bad. The other thing is this has a 40-20-40 split folding seat, which costs about $420 in options lists, and yeah, that's another one of those Jaguar options that'll get you in the end. So let's close that boot and then talk about how much this car costs to run. So while Jaguar may have been making luxury vehicles for a very long time, it's perhaps not got the best track record when it comes to reliability reputation. The English brand has had some troubles in the past, but we've had no issues with our XE this week, and it seems to be getting better. It's also bolstered by the fact that Jaguar in Australia has moved to a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty, leaving BMW behind, which is, you know, something good to see and gives a little bit of extra peace of mind when you're looking to buy one of these cars. You can let me know in the comment section down below if reliability woes is something that would put you off a car like this. Now moving on to service packaging, because the Jaguar is actually pretty affordable to service. So for 5 years or an oddly specific 102,000 kilometers, it's going to cost you $1,950, which is pretty competitive. And finally, we come to fuel efficiency. Now this 2-litre 4-cylinder engine is a pretty small engine for a car this big, but Jaguar has screwed quite a lot of power out of that engine, and it has some ramifications on fuel economy, because although Jaguar claims 6.8 litres per 100 on the combined ADR cycle, in our driving we've seen closer to 10.5 litres per 100 Ks, with that blowing right out to 14 to 15 litres per 100 when driving in really tight urban environments. So that's actually pretty expensive for a car like this, but your mileage may vary. So, driving the Jaguar XE P300 all-wheel drive out on the road. What's it like? Well, I'm pleased to report that there are plenty of aspects that make it feel nice and like a Jaguar should. But one of them that, although is a really good aspect, is also one of the things that makes me want a little bit more from this car, and that's the engine. Under the bonnet of this P300 is a 220 kilowatt, 400 Newton meter, 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine. And that's great. That's cool. It's a competitor for the likes of the BMW 330i, Alfa Giulia Super, Mercedes-Benz C-300. It's the standard sort of thing, except that this engine does make more power than pretty much any of its rivals. In fact, all of its rivals. This is the most powerful in class, making 221 kilowatts. The next closest is the Giulia, which makes 206 kilowatts. So it definitely has the most grunt, but it kind of needs it because this Jag weighs Jag kind of weight. So we weighed it at 1610 without a driver, so a bit over 1.6 tons, and that would be close to 1.7 tons with a 70 kilo driver in it. So she's a pretty beefy old thing, and that kind of stunts this car's 0 to 100 time to a claimed 5.9 seconds. Now we haven't tested that today, but it feels about on par with that kind of pace, and that's very much on par with all the other competitors. So despite it having, you know, at least 15 kilowatts more than the next closest competitor, it is not that much faster in the real world. The engine itself also requires a couple of revs to get up and go. Like it's got peak torque from about 1500 RPM, but anything below 1500 RPM where you're sort of cruising along in a relaxed manner, you're going to find that there's not actually very much grunt available. So you kind of have to rev it a little bit harder, and that's fine because it does sound rather good doing it, as hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate now in dynamic mode using these lovely paddles to shift back a couple of gears. It's got this kind of funky synthesized engine note, and inside and outside it actually sounds more 4-cylinder hot hatch than it does luxury executive sedan, I guess. But you know, what I'm getting at is that I think it's a real shame that Jaguar totally ditched the option of the supercharged V6, the 280 kilowatt, 480 Newton meter flagship that was available before 2019. Was a great engine, had real character, grunty, lusty, and a real competitor for something like, you know, a Mercedes-Benz C43 AMG and a 340i. But unfortunately, that is gone the way of the dodo, and now we just have this one engine in Australia, which, as I said, isn't offensive in any way. I just wish that there was one other option to choose from. Now let's talk about the gearbox, because it's pretty decent. It's an 8-speed ZF item, and you know how good they are. This one's tuning does leave a tiny bit to be desired. It sort of chooses a slightly higher gear than I would prefer most of the time. It does feel a little stumbly around town, and the start-stop system is quite slow to activate as well, so it's not the most refined vehicle to drive in urban environments, but when we're out here on these lovely twisting roads, it's a delight. And the gearbox does a good job in comfort mode, and then you can wind aggression up a little bit by going into dynamic mode. Now, as I said, these lovely thick aluminium paddles behind the steering wheel allow you to take manual control yourself, and it obeys that pretty damn well. The other thing is that the Jag XE is now only available in all-wheel drive. And while that's great if you live in colder climates where you often encounter slipperier surfaces, inclement weather and snow, here in Sydney, where the rain outside is about as rainy as it gets most of the time, it does feel like it could benefit from having just a rear-wheel drive option. Again, it would save a little bit of money, although this car is already quite a lot more affordable than many of its competitors. The car we have here on the road is about 69 grand before on-road costs. For reference, a BMW 330i spec'd up to these levels with equivalent equipment is going to cost you in the region of $85,000 to $90,000. So you get a big saving in this car. But yeah, you know, I think we could have just chucked all-wheel drive as an option, because I think this chassis would really respond well to just a rear-wheel drive platform, because although it's got a nice turn-in, fairly crisp, the steering's a little bit glassy, but it does hook up the front end when you get it turned in and feel quite confident. From the mid-corner onwards, the Jag does just feel a little bit inert because of that all-wheel drive system. You can sometimes get the rear end to push around a little bit and have a bit of fun, but really it's more about being accurate, safe, and yeah, decently quick without ever setting the house on fire. It's good. And then the actual comfort of the chassis sort of reflects that, because it is quite a softly suspended vehicle, certainly in rebound. This car we have on test is just a passively suspended setup. So you get one damper setting that doesn't change when you adjust the drive modes. The tuning is fairly soft to try and mask these rather large 19-inch alloy wheels, which are shot in some Pirelli P0 tyres, which themselves are a little bit harsher than some other options out there on the market, but ultimately it does strike a pretty good balance. The only thing it really sacrifices is a little bit of body control at the nth degree of driving this car hard, which is probably addressed by going for the, I think, $1,200 adaptive damper package, where you get adaptive dampers, where you can just wind that rebound control up a little bit. I think that, compared with the SE specification XE P300 with the slightly smaller 18-inch alloy wheels, would be a really delightful car to drive, especially for country touring. And in typical Jag fare, the XE is a pretty refined car to drive on the road. No wind noise makes it into the cabin really, and most of the external sounds are pretty muted in here, which is nice. And obviously you get set off with the lovely stereo you have in here to just relax and calmly roll along. And that's helped by some of the advanced driver assistance systems that are featured in this car standard as well. So in 2019, most of the kit that you could get as options in the pre-facelift car became standard in Australia. So that means you get AEB, frontal AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection. You also get blind spot monitoring and a lane keep assist system. But this car doesn't have the full-on sort of highway travel assist program where you can just set it on, cruise control with full lane follow assist. The lane trace assist rather just sort of keeps you falling out of the lanes, but ultimately it's pretty good. You also get an adaptive cruise control program as standard, which works quite well in this car. It accelerates briskly when someone pulls out of your way and follows at a not totally ridiculously far back distance like some other vehicles you can get. So ultimately, the Jag feels like a polished, well-refined package that, although perhaps lacks some of the outright sharpness and polish of the BMW 3 Series, which is probably the dynamic hallmark in this segment, it still has its own thing going on. And I think you can test drive this car and you might find yourself kind of falling for it. It's got something about it, a bit of je ne sais quoi, very jaggy in the way it goes about its things. So definitely worth considering in your next purchase, I reckon. So, what do we think of the Jaguar XE P300? Is this thing a 3 Series C-Class and Audi A4 killer? I would say not outright. However, there are some things about it that really make it a tasteful choice for someone. Starting with this rear end, it looks fantastic. What a great looking car. It's also got the most powerful engine in segment and has a really nice ambiance inside the interior. It feels very Jag, relaxing and calming. But it perhaps doesn't reach the same dynamic highs as some of its peers. And that for me is why this is worth considering, but perhaps not the outright run out and buy it right now best car in this class. But you can let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Jag. Do you love it? Are you a lover of the big cat? Or perhaps you bought something else, whatever it is. I'd love to hear it. And while you're down there, we'd also love it if you could hit subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.